Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and we are recording on June 8th. So I'm going to be putting this on the 7 channels I have. So please make sure you subscribe to all 7 channels. I have 4 channels on YouTube, Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. Please help support the work that I do by donating. You can donate on my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com. And or you can help support the work by being a paid member to my Patreon channel. All these videos that I do are for free. If you would like, also take a look at the website that I have and consider purchasing the ebooks and the other products that I have. I'm going to do a series of videos, hopefully they are short, about what has been happening with this agroterrorism, all right, from China, in my perspective. We're going to go and first look at what is being published in the mainstream media, and then we're going to do a deep dive in the research, and then in subsequent videos, I'm also going to give you my perspective, all right? So I'm not sure how many videos this will be, probably 3 or 4. But let's begin with Fox Business.
President Trump says he's disappointed in Elon Musk as the two had a very public blowout yesterday, which started with what was in the big, beautiful bill and the add $2.4 trillion to the deficit over the next decade. Cost without Elon Musk? Well, in the way of your work on the big...
I have to fast forward this. Here we go.
United States. They worked at the university. 2 Chinese nationals have been charged with conspiracy so that they can spend their own money, keep more of their own money, and our small businesses are just so hungry for this certainty, and they're ready to grow and expand and create jobs in Iowa.
Okay, now they're going to transition
Let
to
me
the
get your
story.
take on the other big story that we're following, and that is that these 2 Chinese nationals have been charged with conspiracy and smuggling a dangerous biological pathogen into the United States. They worked at the University of Michigan laboratory, and they were charged with conspiracy, smuggling, and fraud. The FBI says one worked at the University of Michigan through Chinese government funding. She'll be back in court on June 13th. Her boyfriend apparently is back in China. Your thoughts on what went on here? The FBI arrested John in connection with these allegations related to John and Lee's smuggling into America a fungus called Fusarium graminearum, which scientific literature classifies as a potential agroterrorism weapon. It causes head blight, a disease of wheat, barley, maize, and rice. It's responsible for billions of dollars in economic losses. And we have a transcript of their conversation, which the FBI released. And their conversation surrounds how they're going to get this into the country. One asks the other, where did the seeds get put? In the tube? Jean says, I put them in my Martin boot in a small bag, the Ziploc bag, very small. Lee says, that's good, just put it in your shoes. Jean says, I stuffed them in the shoes. And then they mentioned a teacher that gave them the seeds. Lou says, Teacher Lang's seeds must be placed well. Jean says, where to put it? I only have 1 pair of shoes. The insole cannot be pulled off. Lee says, did you bring just 1 pair of shoes? Jean says, 3 pair, wear 1 pair. So what can you tell us about this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank goodness we have President Trump and Director Patel who are willing to take these people to task, hold them accountable, and arrest these people. But we clearly have an adversary here who is intent on undermining the United States. So this time it was bringing the seeds in. They've tried to steal the seeds from my district to take them out of the country, to reverse engineer them. So I think it's very, very clear they want to cheat, they want to steal, and they want to undermine the United States. So again, this is about accountability. We have to start looking at things differently and how we allow these students in, right? They allow 800 American students in, but we allowed 277,000 of them into our country. So we should be going into this eyes wide open with their intent. They are trying to access our research institutions and our universities, and then they're using all of their intel and they're bringing things in to continually undermine us. And we can't allow this to happen while they're using our technology, literally weaponizing it against us. So we shouldn't be funding our own demise.
Well, yeah, and I did a whole special on this called "Underwriting the Enemy." It's good. You're right. We're funding our demise. I mean, we've got Chinese stocks trading on U.S. exchanges right now, and unwitting or witting investors buying those companies. That is, in fact, funding the expansion of the Communist Party of China because the laws are the laws. If those companies have get an order from the CCP to give them information to do something, then they have to follow those laws. So what can you do about it as an elected official? This is more than just, oh, they're stealing intellectual property. Is this not a national security threat?
It is. I think about what this could have done to a state like mine, Iowa, where we grow a lot of corn and soybeans, Kansas that grows a lot of wheat, the entire impact to the American agriculture economy. It's why it's so important to take a look at our ag supply chain. What are we reliant upon China for? I've introduced a bill along with Senator Ricketts to do exactly that. What are our vulnerabilities? How can we as policymakers shore up those vulnerabilities and work with President Trump and Secretary Rollins to protect our agriculture industry? Food security is national security. The reason they're trying to cheat and steal our stuff is because they don't have the innovation that we have. They don't have the land that we have. They don't have the American hardworking spirit that we have in the American farmer. So I think that's the first step. The other step is, again, accountability. And I think that's exactly what we're starting to see under President Trump's administration.
All right, Councilwoman, we'll be watching. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. Ashley Henson, good to
I'm gonna get rid of this visceral fat. Check this out.
Alright, let's see here. What else?
All right, as we continue on, I want to take you out to an unusual headline, but a major headline, as 2 Chinese citizens have now been charged in connection with attempting to smuggle a, quote, dangerous biological pathogen into the United States for university research. The form of fungus is classified as a potential agroterrorism weapon. For more on this, let's be joined outside of the courthouse there, outside of the federal courthouse in Detroit, Michigan, by Garrett Tenney. Garrett, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. What more can you tell us about this unusual story?
Well, the hearing today was to decide if Yingqing Jian would be released on bail until her trial. That decision got pushed to next week so that she can hire a private attorney, but she did appear in court today for those few minutes. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit and she was handcuffed around the waist. But bail may be hard to come by, considering that the government argues there are national security concerns in this case. The FBI says Jian likely smuggled a crop-killing fungus into the country multiple times over the past few years. The pathogen, as you mentioned, is classified as a potential agroterrorism weapon that could be used to target our nation's food supply. Just over a year ago, Jian allegedly sent detailed instructions to a researcher at a Chinese university, walking them through how to package samples of the fungus, hide them in a book, and then send them to her at the University of Michigan, where she's doing postdoctoral research. When her Chinese counterpart asked if officials would inspect the book, Jian allegedly replied, "There are usually no problems. Rest assured, I have mailed these before." This morning, Senator Tom Cotton said it's clear Jian was up to no good.
And I think it's a pretty safe default position that any Chinese national who gets an exit visa from China to come to one of America's universities is probably linked to the Chinese Communist Party or the People's Liberation Army. That's one reason why President Trump has said we're going to start severely restricting visas from hostile nations like China.
Also charged in this case is Jian's boyfriend and fellow researcher Zhongyang Liu, who was detained at Detroit's airport last year when he allegedly tried smuggling some samples of the fungus into the country. On his phone, customs agents found an article titled 2018 Plant Pathogen Warfare Under Changing Climate Conditions. Liu was denied entry into the country and sent back to China, while Jian is now charged with conspiracy, smuggling, making false statements, and visa fraud. She is facing decades in prison if she's convicted. Andy?
All right, thank you so much. It's such a very interesting story because we rarely, if ever, talk about what they're calling agroterrorism, and it's hard to fathom such a small quantity can impact crops. Of course, they're estimating billions of dollars that could have been wasted or used in this. Can you tell me a little
It's
bit more
not
about
just,
that?
here's the problem with layman's in general. It's not the amount that was smuggled in. The laboratory can be using it for enhancement, grow, and then release. Okay. I'll give you a much further in-depth analysis of this. But first, we're going to start with just cursory review of the mainstream media. All right. So we have Liu. All right. Dr. Liu was a postdoctoral researcher. He was the one that was smuggling it in. All right. And is tied to Texas A&M University with publications in biotechnology and orthopedics, and has an affiliation with, pardon my pronunciation of Chinese here, Zhejiang University. Zhejiang University. Right? It's spelled Zhejiang. Okay, that's Liu. All right, that was the one that was transferring. He was 34. Now, Dr. Jian, the one that's working at the University of Michigan, postdoctoral with the University of Michigan, but all of her research was her Ph.D. And my understanding is also some post-PhD work was done in China. All right. So what is happening is lots of funding is taking place from Chinese grants to fund research in the United States. But yet these researchers came from universities from China and earned their PhDs there. So why don't they just do further research there? If the funding is coming from China, why don't they just fund within the country? This is part of this expansionism of the 1,000 Talent Program. The 1,000 Talent Program has morphed into the 10,000 Talent Program, where you take researchers, and part of it is either you recruit researchers that are not Chinese to do technology transfer, and you give them grants and money and all this incentives. There's also individuals that are picked from China to infiltrate other countries, other universities, to do technology transfer, to infiltrate politics and government. All right. So it's not just in the sciences, but also in business and in politics. All right. So with Dr. Jian, she was working on receptors of cells. This is what she was doing in University of Michigan. Receptors on cells that are tied to the immune system that could be for fungal research. She did a lot of fungal research in China, and all this has been funded by China. And we'll go into the depths of this, but that's just a cursory kind of view of this. So Jian, all right, Dr. Jian is the one that was doing the research with this special fungus, Fusarium graminearum. And the question is, why do you have to do it in Michigan? If you did all of this research in China, funded by the Chinese, and then come to the United States, funded by the Chinese in Michigan, well, in Michigan, there's big agriculture, plus you're by Ohio and other states that are very important for agriculture. There was really no scientific reason really to be in the United States. But if you're a researcher, now there's the conduit. And if they've been sneaking in resistant strains of Fusarium, then now they can enhance it. Now Dr. Jian was researching recently uses of certain therapies, let's just say certain ways to mitigate the spread of Fusarium in crops. And understanding the molecular mutations that could either enhance or retard the actual spread. All right. So there was knockouts and enhancements within the research. Okay. So if you have a strain that is not susceptible to fungicides, and you bring that over for further enhancement based on what she was doing in the lab and release, then you have agroterrorism. All right. So, but she was also looking at potential ways to mitigate the actual spread of the fungus. I think what is happening here, twofold. Finding ways to fight the fungus, because I think this fungus is becoming a problem in China. I think their agriculture they have yield problems because of fungal infections, and also as a means of weaponization. Then you tie in the Chinese buying land, agriculture, all right, farmland, next to military bases, and also just buying large swaths of land in general from farmers that are having difficulties. So now they have means to release this stuff in the wild, do experimentations in in controlled environments to try to enhance it. So this can be a big problem. Chinese owning land, American land, farmland, is definitely a problem. And then having research that are doing postdoctoral research at US universities when all of their research is being funded from China. Postdoc fellowship and during the postdoc fellowship. So wait a minute. The universities want the money and to do the research. So they're taking it from the Chinese. But the thing is that why didn't these researchers just do it in the country, in their home country? They didn't need, if it's being funded by the home country, why do they have to do it in the United States? Unless they're a conduit for agroterrorism. All right, so I'll go into more detail in a different video, but let's continue on with this.
Small amount quantity that could have a major impact.
Well, the concern here is that these were researchers and that they were researching these particular samples, these different strains of this fungus. And when you're researching these different types of strains of fungus, that can be used for good or for bad. So they could potentially be looking at how to stop this type of disease from spreading because it's already present in North America, but they could be looking at how to stop it spread, or they could be looking about how to expedite it, how to make it even stronger than it is. Because as you mentioned.
So what it is that in their research, they're doing knockouts, they're doing mutations. And when they're doing certain types of mutations, some of that will enhance the fungus to being able to circumvent the immune system of the plant cell. Other mutations actually reduce the effectiveness of the fungus and it's weaker. And by knocking out these different genes, they can play around and find out which ones would be more susceptible to fungicides and which ones are not. All right, so you start building a library of mutations that are not as easily susceptible to fungicides. And there is the problem. And that is in here. So they find one in the nature, they sent, let's say in China, They send it to the United States, hidden, you know. They send it to the United States. And this is not the first time they did this. All right. So there's already ones that have been shipped and not detected by the authorities. And they have been doing mutations on these fungicides that are the mutations on these funguses that are not susceptible to fungicides. And therefore they're enhancing it. Okay. Now, some of her research, a big part of her research is in molecular and developmental biology. That's evolutionary. It's important because it's not just the molecular part of this, but the evolutionary process to enhance it. So all this research could have been done in China. There's no reason to do it in the United States unless you want to release it. There was no technical reason why they had to do this postdoctoral research at the University of Michigan. Why couldn't they have done it in a state that is not big in agriculture or around states that are big in agriculture? There's a reason why they did that. And that is because they were going to release it. Okay. All right. So with that, let's continue on.
U.S. officials have already said this disease, in its limited current state, whenever it gets into crops, it is already costing an estimated $1 billion a year in lost harvest. So you can imagine if you were able to take this, expand on it, make it even more viral, then it could do some serious damage to our nation's food supply. And if you were in a situation where we
if you attack Taiwan, before you do your attack, you release the pathogens in the food supply. And then the food starts to go down. Inflation starts to go up because there's fewer crop yield. And it weakens the society, weakens the United States as they attack Taiwan. I'll tell you, one of the signals before they attack Taiwan is some sort of biological terrorism. That biological attack, that's going to be a signal.
Any type of conflict with China, our food supply would be at severe risk if this were able to be weaponized. So that's the big concern. They're not saying that that is what the eventual goal was for these two researchers, but that is a possibility in this case. And they shouldn't have had this fungus here in the country. You need proper permissions to study it. They didn't have that. And when they were asked, are you bringing anything that you shouldn't into the country, including samples like this? Both of them explicitly said, no, we are not. That's why they're now being charged with giving false information to investigators, as well as lying about their visas, conspiracy as well.
Yeah, a lot to get into. We're just showing you some of those text messages on the screen right there. I do want to ask you, because there was concern with the United States about this, about different Chinese entities getting into the United States. Have we heard from the University of Michigan? Because that institution obviously doesn't want anything against its name, its research program. Have we heard from them?
Yeah, they released a statement earlier this week, and they essentially said that they weren't aware of any of this, that they are cooperating with investigators, and really didn't go further beyond that. But in the criminal complaint, it is worth noting that the supervisor of this lab, where these Chinese nationals were apparently trying to do this research, they did find a sample of this fungus at one point and asked about it because it looked a little bit different than what they typically work with. But when she asked Jian about it, Jian lied and said that it was some other type of substance that was there. So based on what we know from the criminal complaint, what the university has said, it does not appear that they were aware that this type of research was being done in their own lab.
All right, so very interesting. And of course,
no, I think what happened at the University of Michigan is this. They want the grant funding and publishing of papers. The Chinese needed to get inside the country to be able to do the research because it's easier to make the gain of function research in the United States and then release it versus trying to smuggle it in. Now, she probably, her postdoctoral research at University of Michigan is based on receptors. All right, I think RLT receptors or something like that. And I think they were RLTs. And that's tied into some of the research that she was doing. That dovetails into the research she was doing in funguses, in fungi. So she most likely was doing experiments that was more tied with the receptors, and also doing experiments on the side that's enhancing the actual fungus.
And state taking it very, very seriously. Garrett Penny, thank you so much. I appreciate you reporting, you joining us here on Live Now from Vox.
Yeah. You got it.
All right, thank you so much. All right, great conversation there about a very important story about this, quote, agroterrorism as the form of fungus these Chinese national, they're alleging, classified as a potential agroterrorism weapon.
All right, so it's
Growing your
Fusarium,
business shouldn't mean growing.
Fusarium graminearum. Fusarium graminearum. All right, let's continue on.
One of the Chinese nationals charged with bringing a toxic fungus into the United States faced a judge today and will be back in court next Friday. The U.S. wants to keep the University of Michigan researcher jailed until the trial begins. The Justice Department says she was smuggling in a potential agroterror weapon with her boyfriend, who conducts biological studies in the same field. He is not currently in custody. And joining us now, following this all from Washington, is CBS News Justice correspondent Scott McFarland. Scott, good to see you, my friend. This is a very complicated case. What came out of today's hearing?
Really, it was a delay, but a delay that will keep young Kim Jong in jail pending her next time before a judge next Friday. It is noteworthy this is a non-violent felony crime, but they are ordering this researcher to be jailed until future hearings. That's noteworthy. Put that aside for a moment. This case is different and has been from the start. Allegedly, John and her boyfriend, a Chinese researcher, both of whom do research on microorganisms, tried to smuggle this Fusarium graminearum into the United States, an otherwise obscure fungus which, if not contained and not controlled, can be wildly destructive to U.S. agriculture, to really any agriculture, but also to livestock, and potentially could sicken human beings and could cost billions of dollars in damages. Those images there are from the court filings of this case. What the feds allege is that John's boyfriend was trying to get to her, she works at the University of Michigan, from China and was stopped at Detroit's Metropolitan Airport. In his bags, the feds say they found inside Ziploc bags, balled up into tissue paper, some of that germ, some of that fungus. He was sent back to China. He's not in custody. She's been arrested, and her case, a conspiracy smuggling felony case, is now in the U.S. District Court in Detroit.
Terrorism, such an interesting idea. Now, I want to move on to another topic. You have new reporting of an elaborate swatting scheme aimed at dozens of members of Congress and some social media influencers. For those who don't know, swatting is when someone makes a fake emergency call to lure police to a target's home. So, Scott, what did you find out?
This is a new type of menacing. of harassing targets, be they people you just don't like, or be they public figures or celebrities you're trying to impact. In this case, Thomas Zabo, a Romanian national who's now in the United States to face the case, has pleaded guilty in this case of widespread swatting. According to the charging documents, they are really striking. Zabo ran.
That's a different topic, so let's continue on with this.
In New York City, we know drama, but as city council speaker, I rise above it. I stopped the mayor's.
2 Chinese researchers are facing bioterrorism charges after allegedly smuggling a dangerous fungus into the United States last year.
And the FBI says the fungus can attack crops and make livestock sick. Fox's Mike Emanuel has the story.
2 Chinese nationals are facing charges for allegedly smuggling a dangerous fungus into America. Prosecutors say it's a potential agroterrorism weapon that could be toxic for crops like wheat, barley, and rice. It can also cause vomiting, liver damage, and reproductive defects in humans and livestock.
Agroterrorism, bioterrorism, thankfully so rare, but requires constant vigilance to ensure that it stays rare.
According to the complaint, customs officials found the fungus stashed in the backpack of a Chinese man traveling through Detroit Metropolitan Airport. The man told officials he wanted to conduct research on it at the University of Michigan, where his girlfriend worked. A deeper search revealed a document titled 2018 Plant Pathogen Warfare Under Changing Climate Conditions on the man's cell phone. A later search of his girlfriend's phone uncovered a form describing her membership in the Chinese Communist Party. That prompted the FBI's involvement.
Let's rewind that for a second. All right, let's think about this for a second. Think and listen very carefully.
Through Detroit Metropolitan Airport. The man told officials he wanted to conduct research on it at the University of Michigan, where his girlfriend worked. A deeper search revealed a document titled 2018 Plant Pathogen Warfare Under Changing Climate Conditions on the man's cell phone. A later search of his girlfriend's phone uncovered a form describing her membership in the Chinese Communist Party. That prompted the FBI's involvement. Director Kash Patel tells Fox News.
Think about this. Dr. Jian, was doing all of her research in China, getting grants from China. We'll go over the grants in another video. And she comes to the United States, gets to University of Michigan, and is getting funded by the Chinese for this fellowship, for this postdoctoral research. She's tied to the CCP. You don't get funding at this level for multiple years throughout your scientific career unless you are part of the CCP. This is something that Miss Taiwan has been saying for years. She's heavily involved in the CCP. Now, how? Maybe through compromising. If you don't do this for the CCP, then we hurt your family. That might be part of it. Or that she believes in, the cause. Either way, we don't know. But the thing is, she's tied to the CCP. She's tied to this 10,000 talent program. And she has the capability to further enhance Fusarium where it has more resistance to fungicides.
Smuggling a known agroterrorism agent into the U.S. is not just a violation of law, it's a direct threat to national security. Meanwhile, experts say it's still too early to call this a threat.
Yes, this is a plant pathogen, but it's also one that is distributed globally. The problem is that it could be a little bit different to what we already have here, and that's why it should have been brought in under regulated permits.
In a statement, the University of Michigan
Right,
says
and if they
it
were
was
doing,
cooperating.
everything above board, they would have gone through the permit process. They didn't want to. Why? I think that that version that was being transferred, that strain that was being transferred, either is a very resistant fungicide strain that's in the wild in China, that they're trying to solve a problem they don't want anybody else to know about. Or they have enhanced it in the laboratory, and that she was going to do her research on that and do further enhancement to understand on what. See, there's two paths of thinking here, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. The Chinese have a version of it, either lab made or found in nature, where it is more resistant to fungicides. They send it to her lab and her experience in being able to understanding at the molecular level on how it circumvents, how the fungus circumvents the immune system of the plant and how it circumvents typical fungicides. And by understanding that, they could have a solution, the Chinese would have a solution to their agricultural problem or potential problem. They get the solution. And then they also know through enhancement or knockouts of certain genes, they would have a strain that can be further enhanced to be released in the United States. They prophylactically spray their crops in China, and then they have higher yield, and they hit the United States with spreading this in states that are producing wheat, and barley, and corn, right? And then our yields start to go down. We didn't know what happened. We didn't prophylactically spray the fungicide, so we have a bad year of crop. All right, so it's too late. Once you find out that this is happening, it's too late. If this was above board and they went through all the normal process, the normal regulatory process to get these kinds of things in for research, because they were trying to hide it, they're either trying to hide that they created something new in China, or they have something that is in nature that they don't want the United States to know about. But they could have done all this research in China. They didn't need to do the research in the United States. This is the reason why I think that it adds to the probability that this was going to be enhanced and released into the wild. We are going through, my take on this is that we're going through biological warfare already between the United States and China. On both sides of the fence. I think what we're releasing and they are releasing stuff. Okay, let's go to the next video.
Get on a nice boat with your friends.
Our next story starts at an airport, America's Detroit airport. In July 2024, a customs officer was doing a routine bag check. In one bag, he found Ziploc pouches carrying a fungus. It goes by the name Fusarium graminearum. This is the scientific name. This fungus also has a nickname, which is called the crop killer. The man carrying it was a Chinese researcher. He claimed that he was carrying it for research, and he was not alone in this. His girlfriend was also involved. They were both arrested, and now the American authorities are calling it a case of agroterrorism. But what is it? Why is this fungus so dangerous, and what does this episode mean for US-China relations? We'll start again with what happened in Detroit. Like I said, July 2024, a Chinese researcher was stopped by US Customs and Border Protection. His name was Zun Yong Liu. Inside his bag was the toxic fungus. Prosecutors say Liu tried to smuggle this fungus into the US. It was to be taken to a lab in the University of Michigan, and that is where his girlfriend also happened to work. Her name is Jian Yung Ching. Both of them have been charged with smuggling, conspiracy, and lying to federal investigators. Now let's also tell you about the fungus that they were carrying, the crop killer. It infects crops like wheat, corn, rice, and barley. It causes something called head blight. And worse, the fungus does not stop at plants. It produces mycotoxins. So exposure to infected grains can make you sick. It can lead to vomiting and liver damage. It can also cause reproductive issues in both humans and livestock. In fact, pigs are particularly susceptible. So this fungus can be deadly. It causes billions of dollars in losses worldwide every year. Hence the charge of agroterrorism. But what is it exactly? What is agroterrorism? It is the deliberate introduction of pathogens into agricultural systems. It can be plants or animal pathogens. You use them to infect crops deliberately and to cause massive disruption. Think of it this way. You don't need bombs when you can kill the wheat. You're targeting the source of food. This fungus could have done that. The FBI has called it a potential act of agroterrorism. They say Liu and Jian were not just rogue scientists, they were backed by the Chinese government. Prosecutors say
they've
Jian
been backed
received
by the
funding
Chinese.
from...
They've been backed by the Chinese government with their research in China and all the way with their research in the United States. This is a problem. Why did they have to be here to do their postdoctoral work? Why? Unless they were going to do something nefarious. Okay. So it's going to affect the crops. If you consume it, it's potentially going to harm you. If your livestock consumes it, it's going to potentially harm the livestock. And it's not just this incident. How many incidences have gone by where they have brought in pathogens that are being enhanced in US laboratories? This is the reason why if you have anyone from China, especially that's doing graduate or postgraduate work, you have to have at that US university audited, regular auditing to make sure that their research is above board. And unfortunately, I think there's not enough auditing of their research to make sure that we're not being infiltrated by the CCP. That's one big problem. Another big problem is that the universities need the money. They need the money that the Chinese are sending. So they're very happy to bring on these university students. There was no reason why they had to be here. From a technological point of view, there was zero reason. They could have done all this research in China. They didn't need to be in the United States. But if you start enhancing stuff here, if you take something that's wild, right, and you start enhancing it in the laboratory, it's easy to release.
She's also reportedly a member of the Chinese Communist Party. Which brings us to the question, did China try to disrupt American crops?
Yes.
The FBI chief says they did. His name is Kash Patel. Look at what he's tweeted, and I'm quoting, "This case is a sobering reminder that the CCP is working around the clock to deploy operatives and researchers to
This is part
infiltrate
of the
American.
10. This is part of the 10,000 talent program now. Used to be 1,000 talent program, but it's part of the 10,000 talent program. And they're infiltrating. They're infiltrating from multiple vectors here. They're trying to infiltrate politics. They're trying to infiltrate the universities. They're trying to infiltrate the scientific research, get technology, but also do things in the United States that could be eventually released, all right? Such as pathogens. That's one issue. But if you get into politics, right, and you start to climb up the political ladder and you're tied to the CCP, you may be able to change policy in the United States, or at the very least create seeds of discontent and push socialism and communism in the United States, or cause social disruption. You cause social disruption if you destroy crop yield, if you weaken the immune system of individuals, if you harm the economic engine of the society in the United States, that makes your enemy weaker, and it allows for the Chinese to go in and take Taiwan. I'm telling you, they want to weaken the United States. They're trying to weaken us through the fentanyl. They're trying to weaken us through AI advancement. That's through the deep sea, right? That's how they're trying to do it. They're trying to hurt our agriculture and our own physical bodies by releasing pathogens. So this is really up the game. And this is the reason why Trump is basically saying, hey, universities, you need to give us a list of what's going on with your researchers and what their affiliations are. Because if they're tied, all these people that are getting these special visas to get into the United States, they're all part of the CCP. All right. Now the question is do they really, is their heart really for the CCP, or they're being held hostage through harming their family if they don't do what the CCP wants? I'm sure both are true. All right. Depends on what category of people. There are probably a few categories of these Chinese. Some of them are just doing research and they're not part of the CCP. Many of them are. All right. Some of them are being held hostage by the CCP, and some of them actually, believe in their cause. But it's a problem. Our universities let this happen, and we don't have regulatory framework to be able to negate the problems or the potential problems.
Institutions and target our food supply. So the FBI claims that Beijing is attacking America's food supply, and this fungus could be a potential agro-terrorism weapon. And what is China saying? Well, they're yet to comment. And we must add here that this is not the first such incident. Agro-terrorism is more common than you'd imagine. It dates back to the Second World War, in fact. Nazi Germany apparently considered it. They wanted to drop potato beetles all over Britain. This was to wipe out the local potato crop, although it did not happen. But during the same war, Japan's military planners came up with a similar plan to use grain rust spores to attack enemy crops. Another such case was in the US in 1984. A religious cult intentionally contaminated salad bars with salmonella. This was to suppress voter turnout in local elections. More than 750 people fell ill. So agro-terrorism has existed for some time now. And it's appealing for a simple reason. It is hard to detect, easy to deploy, plus the consequences can be severe. In this particular case, it has geopolitical implications. The woman in question, Jian, is under arrest. She is set to appear in a federal court in Michigan. Her boyfriend, Liu, has been deported to China. The two countries do not have an extradition treaty, so he is unlikely to face further prosecution in the United States. The fungus may or may not have been meant to kill crops, but it is poisoning the US-China relationship.
First post now available in 9 languages on YouTube. English,
And the 36 trillion.
French,
Louis.
Okay, so that is the media cursory view of this issue. So in subsequent videos, I'm going to start diving into the details here. The next video is most likely going to be about the funding. So please make sure that you subscribe to the 4 channels on YouTube that I have. Also Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. Please share the links and ask your social media to follow me. And please support my work. You can donate on Stripe, PayPal, or buy me a coffee on my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Or you can be a paid member to my Patreon channel. I do all these videos for free. And in videos where I can actually promote my products, please listen to those videos and purchase those great products. But I can't do that in this video because YouTube doesn't like that. So please help support the work, donate, share the links, ask your social media to follow me, and get the products that I have. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.